Thomas?
Okay, well, I will go ahead and call this meeting to order at 3:05 p.m. This virtual real-time meeting will be operating under the resolution adopting procedures for public meetings under Nelson County's ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster, and the governor's amendment to the budget bill adopted by the JMRL board on May 18th, 2020. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, and we'll start off by saying thank you very much to all the staff for all the work that went into this. David, I think I'll just turn it right over to you and let us get going.
Great. I also wanted to take a sec to thank Jim for being the chair of this committee last year, and Thomas for picking up the reins this year. I don't think we have any new members for the committee, but basically you all will make a recommendation to the full board today, or schedule another meeting to discuss the budget if need be. And then generally what has happened in the past is in the spring, this group has gotten together to review a final version of the budget and to amend an equipment budget to it. We can call, if need be, in budget season, call this group together to discuss whatever might come up. Okay, so I am going to do, I think, share screen. Is that all right, Thomas?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Marcy, I'll try to call out page numbers, so hopefully you have the documentation in front of you.
I do.
Okay, so starting with the first page here, which staff lovingly refer to as the grid sheet. This is the breakdown of each jurisdiction's costs, both for their local library operational costs and for their regional share. And I wanted to start at the bottom just to look at the totals. I find this helpful. The very bottom of the first sheet there gives you last year's budget, this current year's budget, fiscal year 21, what JMRL is proposing for fiscal year 22, what the dollar change is, and what the percent change per jurisdiction is. So all in all, we're looking at a 2.4% increase in this proposed budget from staff. And you can see by jurisdiction there for Albemarle, it's 1.9% above what they are paying in fiscal year 21. For Charlottesville, it's 2.4% above. For Greene, it's a hair under the current costs. For Louisa, it's 1.6% above current costs, which is about $6,000. And for Nelson, it's 13.9%, the bulk of which is a position that JMRL has been seeking for the Nelson Memorial Library for the last few years. So just to address the changes there, I think it's helpful to go up to the very top again and to look at the regional cost allocation here. Those percentages under each jurisdiction are their share of circulation. It's a 3-year running average. So these numbers change a little bit year to year, and the change here had dramatic impact, or impact at least, on costs. So you can see Albemarle citizens check out 58.25% of materials in the 3-year average, Charlottesville 23.35. Each of Greene, Louisa, and Nelson was slightly down from last year's 3-year average. So I wrote down the numbers here. Albemarle last year was 57.74, so they're up almost 0.5%. Charlottesville last year was 23.04, so they're up about 0.25%. Greene was 7.9, so they're down to 7.52. Louisa was 6.17, they're down to 5.98. And Nelson 5.15, now down to 4.89. So those changes there are what affected their share of regional costs. So Albemarle's regional costs went up a little over $25,000 from last fiscal year. So I'm looking at this subtotal line at the top here. Charlottesville's goes up about $12,500 from last year's. Greene is down $5,300, Louisa's down about $2,000, and Nelson's down about $3,700. So this is something that we'll point out to the jurisdictions when we talk to them later this year, that their share of regional costs, except for Charlottesville and Albemarle, are actually a bit down this year because of the conservative budgeting that we've done. Okay, so the rest of this grid sheet is a branch by branch breakdown of what jurisdictions' costs are. And since my thought was that we would go through each page here, you're going to see those later in more detail. So we'll skip going through these here and review them as we see the individual branches. I'll go over to the next page here. Any questions about
And
the grid sheet? Yeah, Marcy?
this is Marcy. I just wanted to make a comment, a general comment. I found it really helpful in the past to see the percent change between the fiscal 2021 budget and the proposed 2022 budget, which isn't included on these spreadsheets. It's just helpful for flagging things that had a bigger than expected change for me. So when I go through the budget, just
Are you talking about
as a point of information for the committee.
for line items, like as we get deeper into the budget?
Yes, line item changes. Right, exactly.
Yeah, we did, Jerry and I did make some formatting changes this year in order to add actuals, which was a request from Albemarle County. And because of that, we probably made a choice to lose some things. But we'll take a look and see what we can fit in there. I don't think the
Okay.
information is hard to get. It's in there. It's just a matter of finding a place to display it. So
Yeah,
the-
if you don't do it on the big sheet, on the individual unit sheets, you could easily do it. There's plenty of room.
okay.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So the next page is the entire budget, and this has what I was just describing, Marcy, the actuals for the last 3 years, 18, 19, and 20, the current year's budget, and then the proposed budget for next year. So the idea here was to give a very full picture of what has been spent and what has been requested recently. So you can see here, salaries and benefits, the total number is proposed for next year, $6.3 million, up from the 6.137 in the current budget. The main difference there is the proposed 2% cost of living raise for staff, which is just a hair under $100,000 there. It's $96,500. This also includes, of course, the new job in Nelson there, which is a Nelson only cost, but it's part of the overall salaries and benefits picture we're looking at. The retirement difference that I sent out to the budget committee last week, so that ended up being about $60,000, and that's something that we don't have any say in. JMRL is committed to pay that increase of $60,000. And then medical change just a tiny bit here. Basically, medical costs are projected to remain the same for next year from the city. The difference there is for the new position. It would be the medical costs associated with the new position in Nelson. Any questions about the total salaries and benefits there? I ran through that pretty quickly, but basically about half of that is the raise that JMRL is seeking. So for the operational costs, I'm going to have Jerry make any comment he'd like to make. I will point out at the bottom here that the operating expenses difference, that it's 2.327 million this year. For fiscal year 22. For the current year, it's 2.331. So it's a few $1,000s down, and this just has to do with the conservative budgeting that we're looking at for the foreseeable future here while we deal with a COVID reality. And the only other comment that I have is that Jerry let me know this morning that the fiscal year 19 actuals column here is actually going to go up a little bit. That data that got scraped didn't include the window right after July 1, where some invoices are paid to the previous fiscal year. So it's going to go up a bit, and Jerry can maybe speak to that. Jerry, anything else to point out on this page you'd like the committee to know about?
Just generally speaking, it's a little bit of I think I used these exact handouts for the last general board meeting describing how the budget was put together. So if you see cases where some of the fiscal 20 actuals dip a bit in specific categories, I might point out things like utilities, for example, a lot of it due to the shutdown of the buildings from March 15th onward. So if you see them dip in 20 and back up to 21 and 22. That's part of the reason. The item that David just mentioned about the fiscal 19 piece missing, actually that include fiscal 19 items, invoices that were paid in July, but there's just a couple of specific items that were added during the audit process. So in the next version of the budget, we'll have those up to date. Any other specific items? Some of them are contractual items, custodial services contracts, rent that are built into contracts. Most of the other costs are relatively stable. As pointed out in the board meeting last week, we have added some additional funding in for COVID-19 supplies, sanitizer, wipes, gloves, etc. It's not in the entire budget is not a lot, but just something to account for that change in procedure that we have. So any other specifics, I'm happy to add some detail on that.
Jerry, do you want to mention what those last two lines were there that we were talking about, just because they're written in some accounting language that nobody understands?
Sure. In the next version, I'll have those written out completely. Those are basically an adjustment made by the city auditors to highlight items that they consider capital items, capital expenditures from an accounting point of view. The first one, the $15,000 that David has highlighted, was the new circulation desk that was put into the Scottsville branch sometime in late calendar 2018. And the second item, the $7,000 and change, system at the Gordon branch. So again, for the accounting purposes, they're broken out differently there, so they can track them for accounting purposes.
And we'll try to get those labeled in a way by the time this goes around to the full board that is in English, people will understand. Questions from the committee about this overall snapshot?
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate the walkthrough there. I don't have any questions immediately. I think it's terrific to be able to absorb, what was it, I think $14,000 in cleaning supplies there. Yeah, looks like about, and still keep the overall operating expenses down from the previous year. I think that shows some good versatility in the budget there. And yeah, the 30, I think it was 37 we talked about, David, for the new position in Nelson out of that 42,000 that we see on the grid page there as their increased cost.
Yeah.
And that's a unique cost to them related to that position. I think that makes sense, and this is pretty straightforward. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions?
And I had thought, Thomas, that we would look branch by branch to kind of go through this, if that's how you'd like to proceed.
I think that would be great. That might just help us suss out any last thoughts before we move on to talking about crafting a recommendation for this.
I had a question. If I can find my little raise my hand.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Now going up to raise my hand and looking back down, I've lost my line on here. Let me see. Oh, down under website development, and I'm sure you covered this the other day, Jerry, but I refresh me because I know we had that for 2020. And is this referring to the library webpage and what
That's
they're
correct. We didn't address that specifically last week, but yeah, there was an outside company that was brought in to assist in the development of the back end. David, you probably may have a little more detail on what specifically they did, but yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned this to the board in the past, but we contracted with Braid, an outfit in Charlottesville, to do 3 things basically: to help with Drupal support and code test on that, for design review and support, and then the third is to set up a test server environment for it. So those that were actually, JMRL paid for a chunk of hours there, and we haven't used all of them. So some of that is still available. It was
Okay.
paid for, but we still, in fact, Josh and I just met yesterday to talk about using some in the next few weeks here.
Okay, I just wondered how that figured in, because when we discussed, hiring someone to manage the website, And I was just, yeah, I'm just looking at if this cost were for just consulting, correct?
Yeah, that pretty much that was it. And it was for
Okay.
them to review the work that our in-house developer did and to stress test it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have another question.
Okay, shall we move on to the first branch? First department?
Sure.
So you can see that this is the format they're all going to fit basically. Is that the first grouping here is strictly salaries and benefits, and we've got the fiscal year 20 actuals, the 21 budget, and the 22 proposed budget. So the number that we're proposing is on the far right column here, and then underneath that are all the operating expenses. Same 20, 21 budget, 22 proposed, and then the very bottom right is the proposed for that branch. So Bookmobile is a unique one, split 80-20 between Albemarle with 80 and Charlottesville with 20. And that's broken out on the grid sheet. It tells you what that percentage split is. That's not based on circulation. It's by contract between those two organizations. So you can see the salaries have gone down in the last few years because, of course, Willow retired, had been the longtime employee manager there, and also was on the DB retirement plan, which is the more expensive pension plan that JMRL no longer offers to new employees. So there were some salary savings after fiscal year 20 there. Jerry, there were no actuals for building and vehicle maintenance in fiscal year 20. Is that just good luck that year?
No, that's you'll see nothing, virtually nothing there in fiscal 20, and then 21 and 22. Those particular costs are directly applied by other city staff into SAP, and they lump them all elsewhere. That's more, at least for 21 and 22, is what I'm hoping to have them split that out between the Bookmobile and our other vehicles, so that it's more specifically shown what the Bookmobile does cost.
So currently the city pulls it out of another line, basically, not
they dump it all in one, I think,
automotive.
either under maybe under central. I'd have to look at, but it'll come up as we go through. But they lump all vehicles together, and so I'm trying to work with them to get them to place all the specific Bookmobile costs in this budget. But so that's why you see a difference there.
That would be great. Okay, any questions here? These are numbered, so there was actually 3 documents sewn together. So Marcy, we're about to move on to page 2 of 16. It says on the bottom, even though it's really your 4th page.
Yeah, I'm with you, David. It's fine.
Got it. All right. Next up is the historical collection here. You'll notice the uniqueness here and that there are no kind of local costs besides salary. And that's, of course, because this employee splits time but works at the Historical Society next door and at the reference department here. So those reference costs will be under a different category. And again, savings there over the last few years because of a retirement. Peg O'Brien, longtime 30-plus year librarian there, retired and also was on the pension plan, and the new employee is at a lower salary rate and also on the newer retirement plan.
That's a nice little snapshot of just all of the hidden expenses that go along with, even a single employee.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's DB, it's called. So that we offer 2 JMRL supporting 2 retirement plans, the defined benefit and the defined contribution. Defined benefit is the pension plan that 10 plus years ago, the board voted not to offer anymore. The defined contribution is a very nice 8% direct contribution from JMRL. So for every staff salary for the year, we contribute 8% into a fund for them. But the DB costs are, as you saw with that maneuvering last week, are very expensive, and they go up each year. So even though we lose employees and their salary comes down, that cost gets distributed elsewhere because we're still supporting the retirees from that system and will be for many, many, many years.
David, one question about this that I've never asked.
Shoot.
Are these costs for the historical collection allocated among all the jurisdictions as a central cost, or are they Charlottesville, Albemarle?
They're Charlottesville, Albemarle, and that's actually broken out on the grid sheet as well. Marcy, if you see the Historical Society, 50% Charlottesville, 50% Albemarle. So
Okay, fine.
and same for Mon Ave, which is coming up. It's just a 50-50 split. So Nelson doesn't pay anything into the Charlottesville Albemarle Historical Society, which is only right because Nelson has its own historical society, and so does Louisa, and so does Green. Okay. And again, there was a change this year in which the new employee is a roughly 20 hours at the Historical Society and 20 hours at Central Reference in order to kind of do some training with the reference staff so that we're open more hours normally than the Historical Society, so they can provide more extensive resources and train our reference staff to better answer genealogy and local history questions moving forward. Okay. Central. So this is a bigger one. Again, same format here, where we've got the salary and benefits costs up front here. An increase here, we are looking at that 2% raise. So you can see the difference in salary, the 962 up to 971. I'm guessing that's for the 2% raise. The retirement one is a big one because we do have staff at Central that are on that DB plan. So the costs are here. Health insurance, the same, no changes. Life insurance, a slight increase. And then all the operational costs here for the Central Library, which are significant. Anything to point out here, Jerry? Anything?
Generally the same as for the budget overall. Some dips in fiscal 20. Yeah, nothing outstanding.
Okay. The actuals is kind of funny to look at when you see $4 for fuel.
I think Rob filled up the lawnmower gas tank once, and there you go.
That is pretty funny.
Everything accounted for.
All trivia.
It's funny that was an even $4. I might have to go back and find the receipt on that. Okay, Crozet is next. So this one is an Albemarle only cost. Central, I should say, pointing back to the grid sheet. I don't want to get anybody motion sickness, but it is split also by circulation. So the Charlottesville area branches, their local costs are split between Charlottesville and Albemarle depending on usage for the last 3 years again. So Central, 52.2% Albemarle and 47.79 Charlottesville. Gordon, 53% Charlottesville, 46 Albemarle, and it's about 80-20 Albemarle Charlottesville at Northside. So that cost that you look at for Central there are going to be split between those two localities in that way. I'm trying not to bounce you all around the document because this would make me seasick, but so back to Crozet, similar story here. The slight increase in salaries and benefits, no new positions. The change there is basically the 2% raise, and anybody at that branch that was on the DB plan, there's extra costs for their pension increases. And looks like operating totals are pretty much in line where we've been the last few years. Crozet, I should say, is in good shape now for staffing. It's taken a few years to get to the place where it is, but I feel like this is pretty close to optimal staffing for Crozet for what we're doing now in normal non-COVID times and now in Tier 3, which is going very well in Crozet this week.
Good to hear.
Okay, Gordon Avenue. Similar story, increase in salaries because of the 2% increase in retirement a little bit there. We are doing a reclassification of a position at Gordon that Crystal will be talking to the board about as part of the compensation committee report at the next full board meeting. But that's the difference in, you can see Social Security changed here and it didn't necessarily change in other places. There's a slight change in one of the positions. Again, medical the same everywhere. Operating costs a little bit down. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is specifically, but it looks like The budget for this year was a bit higher for repairs and maintenance and the one-time building services.
It could just be related to including fiscal 18 and 19 actuals and averaging that out. So go back into that data. That's probably
Yeah.
the result of that.
Okay. I can't see you also, so just holler if you need me to slow down or speed up.
This is terrific. Thank you.
Okay, Greene County, the increase here is almost entirely in well, that's not true actually. Now that I look, the operating expenses there, we are looking at a significant increase in the repairs and maintenance, just percentage wise, as Marcy was pointing out earlier. It's not a tremendous amount of money, but every penny counts. So Jerry, I take it that the fiscal year 22 proposed there for repairs and maintenance is just an average of the actuals of the last 3 years.
Partly, and if I recall, that's the correct branch where at the last minute in last year's budget, we had to reduce those, some of the operating expenses.
We
In the
did.
green budget, yeah, so that may have been Nelson, but I'm pretty sure it was green. Anyway, that's, let's say, a combination of the two, if not just repairs and maintenance. Sorry. It's either or both combined. So, but I can look into that closer if needed.
Okay. When did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have a question, an explanation, really. What is, could you give me an example, Jerry, of service contracts and how, what's included?
Typically, the smaller branches, what we might use that for is something like carpet cleaning or window cleaning, which we try to do, generally speaking, on an annual basis at the outlying branches. If, for example, the county doesn't do that already. Repairs and maintenance, just sort of a placeholder for certain, not accidents, but things that take place if the bathroom flooded or something and needed to be have a company come in and clean that up or do some plumbing repair or whatever. That's basically the general difference between the two.
Okay, so it's not an ongoing contract. It's someone you're contracting for specific work.
For repairs and maintenance, yeah, you don't know specifically what you're going to need, but generally
Right.
speaking, one or two things will break during the year that we'll need to address, and we have money
Okay.
there set aside for it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is the library admin line. You can see the changes in salary, about a little under 10,000 there for a raise. And same with retirement there. The changes are because we do have admin staff that are on the DB plan. No changes to life insurance or health. I'm not sure about the Social Security. Actually, now that I think about it, I'll have to go back and look and see. Oh, I'm sure it's based on a percentage of salary. So since the salaries go up a bit, Social Security goes up a bit. And then here are the actuals, the budget, and the proposed for next year. For the operating expenses, these are admin costs are shared regional costs. So these are part of the first 3 lines on the grid sheet, and they're broken out by the percents that we discussed earlier. So you can see the large increase projected in cleaning supplies next year, no surprise.
Where are we getting a break on rent?
Yeah, is that here, Jerry, or would that be under Northside?
When you're saying a break, are you referring to?
It's going down about $3,000 over last year.
Oh,
overall?
right.
Yeah. So if you look at the entire budget, David, you could. Okay, so this one for regional. Sure. Pull up my cheat sheet as I'm thinking. Yeah, I think some of the costs we were estimating a little higher in prior years, and they came in a little bit lower. I'll pull out specifics as we're talking, and I can fill that in later.
Well, I can speak to a few things here. So JMRL rents administrative space, like my office and Donnelly's office and Krista's office. We rent basically. So that's part of our administrative costs. But then we also are renting now the basement area of the McIntyre building next door, which had never been a cost before. And then there are a few other things under the north side line where you'll see there, because we also rent some parking spaces from the Daily Progress there. So I think that and Jerry can look at the actual numbers here, but I believe that it's the case where this bounced up and down for a few years because we weren't always being charged. Isn't that correct, Jerry? That
There was 1 year where we were not charged.
right. So we didn't appropriately account for it in the budget at that point. And the past few years, it's been trying to get it to kind of settle to a median. And I think this is it.
Okay.
This is a 2-pager. Oh, wait. Is that still the same category? Yeah, library admin local. Okay, so this is a place where some operating expenses do go up, and these are generally regional costs. Here's the line for vehicle fuel that we were mentioning earlier. So I was joking about the $4 at Central, and it didn't come out of this line, or the bookmobile actually. It probably got charged to this line. Is that correct, Jerry? And it should be charged.
Yeah,
to the bookmobile line.
that's where they put all the
Yeah.
all the vehicle related costs.
And
Questions? This credit card fees one is about to go up because we're going to roll out a pilot, hopefully in the next few weeks here in Crozet, to start taking some cards in order to try and offer some contactless in the building services. So not necessarily for fines and fees, although we could use it for that, more for faxes, copies, things like that, in order to try and cut back on the cash handling. So this is the share of state aid that we carve out in order to pay for supplies, specifically for the materials processing. So it's like stickers, book tape, things like that. And every year it's around, I think we carve out $25,000 every year. So this is a money from state aid. Basically, this doesn't come from any jurisdiction, and it's used for all the technical services processing. Questions on that? Okay, in Louisa County, salaries, the big difference on the top portion there is the retirement. We do have staff that are on the DB retirement plan out there, so that 54%, the change in the percentage that we have to apply affected here, so there's an increase. And again, that's not something JMRL has a choice in. We're obligated to pay. We had cut, I think, some of the operating expenses in order to try and have a balanced budget last year when we got flat funding after the COVID response from Louisa County. They're kind of second budgeting attempts, which all of our jurisdictions, I felt so bad for them, had to go through and do their budgets twice last year. So did we. Jerry, anything to highlight here?
Nothing dramatic, no.
Wendy, any questions about it?
well, I was just okay. I just wanted to take a quick look back at the cost of the other branches in terms of telephone. That's the only thing. I was just looking. Okay. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And that's a bit different from branch to branch. Like in Greene County pays for the telephone service there. It's part of it. I don't think that's even contractually written down anywhere. It's when they built the new building, they assume that cost and they pay it like Louisa pays costs for cleaning of the building. So that's a bit jurisdiction by jurisdiction. There are some idiosyncrasies like that. And I know we've been through this with the telephones there before. We are working on a new phone system out there, Ring Central, which is a really truly over internet phone. It's a bit of a leap of faith for us, but if that works, I hope that these costs can come down in the years to come. No operating expenses for Montav because it's considered, it's inside the Central Library. Okay, so Nelson is one of the places where you do see a major change. And again, the big difference there is the 40-hour position that Jay Morrell is seeking to support the new, the expanded library. With that new salary comes a rise in, retirement costs and health insurance costs and the other associated costs. Again, I think that the operating expenses there are up because we budgeted a bit low for fiscal year 21 in order to balance the budget. We made some cuts there to things that we thought we wouldn't need. Now, some of the costs in fiscal year 20 were down a bit in that area as well because there weren't a lot of repairs and maintenance required in, when it was a construction zone. Local travel was a bit down in the last quarter for COVID reasons. So staff would have in the past maybe traveled to Charlottesville for meetings or whatnot. And most of those were virtual. I do expect moving forward, clearly we're not going to have in-person meetings for a little while, but even after that, Jay Morrell is going to work to offer, if not entirely virtual, some sort of hybrid version where folks can tune in. And some of our committees were already doing this. Like I know the Young Adult Committee does this where people can kind of Zoom in and join a meeting that the physical meeting is in wherever it might be, and folks all around the region can Zoom in. I'm not sure how much savings we'll see off of that, but it saves time for sure for staff from having to cart themselves around an area the size of the state of Delaware. Yeah, Marcy.
For Nelson, the telephone 2021 budget was only half of what it had been actuals in 2020.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a question about that? I mean, is there a reason for putting it back to the prior level, or a reason for the significant dip?
Yeah, I mean, the dip was just, I think basically it was our attempt to balance this budget last year, knowing that basically the regional library would absorb the difference there.
Okay, that's fine. So but I think we need to, I think they need to understand that that's what happened.
That it wasn't like the costs were only $1,700. And again, we're only partway into the year, but when we look at these actuals at the end of the year, they're going to be around $3,500, I'm sure.
Okay, all right.
If not more, because, some phone work has been done for the new, I'm not sure if we added any lines or not. I'd have to ask Josh on that, but if so, then that cost is actually going to be more than the $3,400 as well.
I think we actually did. But,
I think you're right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, hopefully we'll in the next few years, we'll kind of average that out a bit and get to where we finally land.
Okay. Just as long as they don't think that we can do it for $1,800.
Yeah, every year. Yes. I wish. I'm always shocked by how expensive phones are, but
yeah.
Okay, Northside salary increase. If you recall, this also included some substitute hours that the Personnel Committee recommended. So it's not just entirely the 2% increase here. There were a few more hours added. So that I think that the total in the salaries line there is a bit more than just a 2% raise. Retirement also went up quite a bit here, $12,000, because we've got staff at Northside that are on the DB plan as well. Here's a thing on rent that, Thomas, I mistook what you were asking earlier for this question here. Jerry and I worked with Albemarle County. There was some question about how they were applying the increases annually to the contract that we have to rent the Northside Library, and we found a little bit of a change there, and it will go down slightly next year, not a tremendous amount.
Okay. You
can see that the actuals for the rent there in 20, I don't have the 20 budget in front of me, but we probably budgeted 745 to 750 for it, and the actuals was 731. So the 747 is where we expect to be next year. Questions on this? Lindsay, any questions about that?
No, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I have a probably ignorant question, but if you know what the rent is, why would it vary so much?
I think this is because of well, two things. So I was about to say, and I was going to say incorrectly, that we did add parking spaces. We've added several chunks of parking spaces over the years, and like a group of 10 at the Daily Progress, another group of 10 at the Daily Progress, and then the parking in front of the empty warehouse next door. But actually, it was because of a misunderstanding that we had about a date, about when increases should begin in the contract that JMRL has with Albemarle County. It turns out that they were applying increases it was supposed to be at the end of the initial term, which was 3 years, and they had been doing it annually for a few years, and nobody caught it for a while. It's actually Zach that first brought this to my attention about a year or so ago. So we brought it back to Albemarle County, and then we had to rework, what it should be moving forward, so that the increases weren't based on the overpayment that JMRL had made. It's not a lot of money, but the increases moving forward would be based on what the amounts should have been.
Okay.
Add a small point to that.
Yeah.
Well, is at the same time, the prior agreement ended at the end of fiscal 20. So the fiscal 21, not quite a negotiation, if you will, but the new agreement that David was referring to, the new basis for payment, was unknown at the time we put the fiscal 21 budget together. So we estimated on the high side, just because we were unsure about where that was going to land. So fiscal 21 is fair to say the budget there is a little artificially high.
Okay.
Fiscal 22 brings it more back in line now that we resolved the issue David was talking about.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the Scottsville Library. And you can see the increase there. In the past few years, we have done some work in Scottsville to shore up salaried staff there. We've done some conversion of substitute hours into salaried employees. So you can see 20's salary versus the 21 budget. Big discrepancy there between those 2 years. But this was one of the things that Albemarle was really interested in seeing forward. They knew they couldn't fund the raises that JMRL were seeking, and they couldn't fund the 40-hour regional IT job, but they were very interested in shoring up the hours at Scottsville with staff there. So at any rate, that's kind of a little historical background there. So the change from this year, though, is not that great. It's the 10% raise, a slight change in retirement. I'm not sure. Well, Jerry, any comment on the actuals? Oh, I know what that is. Of course, the $1,000 there is the JMRL scholarship for a staff member who was going through library school.
And it's probably more of a typo because typically we put that under regional costs, but
Okay. Yeah, we should look at that.
Yeah.
How about that machinery and
I don't want to say typo, it was just meaning it was applied to Scottsville instead of the regional costs.
yeah.
Question, I'm sorry.
Oh, I don't know. I'm asking what an expense 2 years ago was. I'm not sure it's worth anybody's time today. You and I can go look. Okay. Tech services. Again, we're seeing an increase in salaries and benefits there, in line with a 2% increase.
And this is where we would have seen the IT position go if that was something we
Yeah,
included here.
that would have been in the salaries chunk here, and then the associated Social Security retirement. And this one gets split regionally by the percentages at the top of the grid sheet there.
Okay.
You can see the fiscal year 20 expense of machinery and equipment there. And Jerry and I looked into that, and it was, they were originally budgeted as equipment costs, reclassified as operationals. Jerry looked up for me what it was specifically. I think it was 66 PCs and then Wi-Fi equipment regionally. Expense in fiscal year 20.
What's the $15,000 in software that wouldn't have been a capital expense?
for reasons I haven't been able to totally decipher, it seems over the years that some software has been charged to our operating budget and some to our equipment budget. And that amount in 21 is, if we go back into the fiscal 18 and 19 actuals, probably more of a representation of what's happened historically. It's an ongoing investigation.
Okay, I'll be curious to.
No, but I'm working with Josh. I think going forward, we're trying to parse out what really should be applied in software arena to our equipment budget and what should be applied to the operating budget. So we will get there.
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky area, but I think I'd be interested to see what you guys come up with for rules. I think that's worth putting the work into.
Sure.
And Jerry, because there's nothing on that line in the proposed, I'm assuming that means that we're expecting to spend equipment budget funds on that.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and is this the last page? Ah, congratulations, team. So this is the rest of the state aid that's coming in, the amount that is entirely spent. It really should say, I can hear Meredith in the back of my mind, books and materials, because it's not just books, it's also our databases, our online content, DVDs, all the wonderful things you can find at your public library. But this is the money coming directly from the state with that $25,000 taken out for some supplies for tech services. You can see annually, this is over in the actuals than the budgeting. Sometimes that's because the board will make a grant out of the general fund to supplement it. And sometimes it's just because if we're gonna overspend anywhere in our budget, it should be on books and materials. So we're expecting the same amount from the state. I'm actually expecting that this number might go up a bit in the fiscal year 22 proposed. As I mentioned to the board last week, the budget that the governor has now does include an increase here, which could be up to $30,000 for JMRL, and that's where this would land.
But that hasn't been signed yet, is that right?
No, it's not as far as I know. I haven't heard officially from the state that our amounts have changed. And I feel like the grand total should get its own page or something. It's stuck on the bottom of tech services state here. But there we go.
Yeah,
So of course,
Excel is a little bit quirky about splitting that up, so
it's fine, Jerry. It looks great. I think
it's always something more to strive for, David.
So what this does not include, of course, is the equipment budget requests for next fiscal year. And Jerry and I have been talking about this. Generally, we ask managers in January to put together their list of expected equipment needs for the following fiscal year. And then he and I go through and review them and put a budget together and say yes or no to things. We're probably going to push that schedule a little bit this year. We have actually not bought things in the first 6 months of this fiscal year, Q1 into the beginning of Q2. We have told managers that we're going to hold most of the equipment budget purchases because we, of course, had not had any fine revenue in since March, which is what makes up the equipment budget. I believe we'll be able to get the things that managers requested for this current fiscal year, but we're just going to take it slow on that, and we're going to hold off on asking for things for the next year because we won't even have bought this year's things yet. So I expect it won't change the board's timeline much. This budget committee will still get together around the same time. It's in the board schedule there of when we expect to get together and talk about the equipment budget. It'll just compress the staff's time a little bit, but that's fine. It was a much bigger, there was more time. We were getting things in January and the board wasn't, of course, voting on them until April, May, June. So there was plenty of time already baked into that schedule. Okay, so the changes that we will see, Marcy, we'll look and see about the percentages that you requested. And as Jerry mentioned on the second page here, there's going to be some adjustments to the actuals, which doesn't change any of the proposed budget. It's just a more complete picture of what was spent in those years there. Otherwise, any questions about this budget? Anything that needs to be worked on, or any comments? Any feedback on changes?
The only last thing that I'm kind of thinking of as I sit here looking over my notes and everything else, I'm coming back to that $14,000 increase on the cleaning supplies line, which is totally understandable given the circumstance, but I'm just wondering if we feel like there's any more that we could do in terms of reaching out to the funding jurisdictions that just received their CARES funding and presenting that as an opportunity for them to help save us a little bit of money in the general operating expenses.
Yeah, I have had conversations with most of our jurisdictions about their CARES funding. Albemarle is the one that had said that, JMRL could reach out for things like that. I think the CARES money that they have currently has to be spent by the end of this calendar year. So wouldn't
That's correct, yeah. Well, but there are ways, if you front load contracts, for cleaning companies to come in and do work on a, 6-month term or something like that, there might be a way that they could set up that as an expense that goes out the door before December 31st to cover a period of work that extends after December 31st.
Sure, we can talk to them about that. I mean, in my mind, it was mostly here like actual supplies, and we're running into a storage issue because most of our storage space is at capacity right now. It's full of furniture and things like that people our staff are removing in order to make socially distant spaces. But that's a good point there, Thomas. I'm happy to reach out and see if we can make some things happen.
Okay, thank you. Well, if nobody else has any other thoughts or questions there, do we want to move on to talking about moving this in front of the full board in November?
I think you've got us, Thomas.
Okay. Well, would anybody be interested in making a motion? Do we like this the way that it stands currently?
David, still no more feedback from the jurisdictions about their anticipated raises for their staff?
No, they all have said it's too early, and they likely won't make those decisions until early next calendar year, which is normal for most of them. The only one, Marcy, that I mentioned this to Thomas this morning, but Albemarle County is planning, as far as I know, to push their budget cycle a little bit. They're not going to be starting, on time when they normally do, because they want to get as much revenue projection as they can. Everybody else at the regional agreement meeting indicated that they would be working on their normal schedule. So I would expect to hear probably from Louisa first on that about what they're going to do with their staff, and then kind of down the line from there. Nelson and Charlottesville are usually at the other end of it. I know what this current year was. It was no increases for staff in Charlottesville, Albemarle, an increase in Louisa, and I can't remember off the top of my head for Greene and Nelson.
I think Nelson had an increase.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind our funders that that they're public-facing employees of the library here who represent their county in a lot of ways, no matter where they are. In Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, or Nelson did not get a raise last year, and are working under strenuous circumstances. So I think everybody believes that it's the right thing to do. It's just going to come down to funding.
Okie doke.
Thank you, Marcy. Well, any other thoughts or questions, comments?
Was there anything that you needed resolved before we go ahead and recommend it, Thomas? Because you had a couple questions.
Nothing that I think needs to be resolved here immediately today, because it does sound like we're going to have a little bit of back and forth, especially with the city, I think, as we move forward through the process here. And nothing that I think would change the underlying asks that we have in front of the funding jurisdictions here. I think $15,000 of cleaning supplies, if somebody's willing to pick up that tab, and put it under their COVID expenses, probably isn't going to make or break a 2% raise across the board on staff salaries.
Right, right. But so I would then move that we present this this is November.
Yes, at the end of this month. Yep.
Hey, this is November. At the November meeting to the rest of the board, the proposed 2022 budget.
Is there a second?
I'll call you right back. I second it.
Thank you.
Wait.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so what I will do is Jess and Lane is working on a cover, some cover art for a budget, and I'll write a narrative for the introduction, and we'll put this together and send it out to the full board to begin reviewing this week, and then it will also be part of the handouts, so publicly posted as part of the handouts for the board meeting later in the month. And then if the board agrees to it, doesn't have any major changes or revisions that are needed, and adopts it, then we'll submit it to JMRL's jurisdictions after the November board meeting.
Great, thank you very much. All right, well, thank you everybody for going through this all this afternoon, and to the staff especially for all the work ahead of time putting it together. Anybody have any last thoughts before we adjourn here today? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move so.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to second that?
Oh, I'll definitely second that.
All right, and all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much. Appreciate all your time this afternoon, and thanks again to the staff. David, we'll look forward to seeing that with the cover letter here before the next board meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you all so much for your time.